I just want to talk briefly about software development vulnerabilities. And what we're talking about here, so one of the major vulnerabilities in IT infrastructure is the software itself. I'd say that's probably the most common attack vector is going to be application and programming vulnerabilities. So some kind of flaw that's in applications and programs and so forth. And if you think about it, this is one of the things that's happened, or one of the things that affects quality for IT software. For our industry, I think the software industry in general has probably the poorest quality assurance as opposed to other industries, which kind of makes sense. If you're building a car, if you don't build the car correctly, if you have some kind of vulnerability, or if you have some quality assurance issue when you build a car, number one, you get a lot of very unhappy customers if it's something common that shows up in the car. Maybe the windshield wipers never work or something like that. It could be rather benign, but it could also be a safety issue. And when it's a safety issue, the government makes you do a recall. Then you have to fix all that stuff. And that's a very costly undertaking for a car manufacturer to bring all these cars back and have to replace some faulty part as a result of their design. So when they do design for cars, it's a very regimented process. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of quality assurance that goes into that process. In software development, while we should have the same amount of rigor, we don't frequently have that amount of rigor. And one of the reasons for that is it's so easy to fix problems after you deploy a product. If you deploy a product like a car and you want to fix a problem, you have to recall it. If you have a problem in software after it's deployed, well, it's very easy to fix. You just issue a patch. And that costs little or nothing for people to both apply the patch and for you to distribute that patch. You might have some cost for patch management or some system to notify your customers, but that's negligible compared to what other companies have to pay when they have faulty products that get released into the market. So I guess the reality is that we are going to have vulnerabilities in software because of that culture and how we do software development. One of the things that's changed a lot in software development just in my career, early in my career, software development was a very regimented process like many other industries. It was a very engineering-driven process. So you had this sort of life cycle of development that, again, was very regimented. And what's happened, it's become very commonplace for companies to move to new models that are faster, with less quality assurance throughout that process. Maybe they still do all the testing and everything, but that happens later on. It's not always central to the process. It's no longer been the focus. Now the focus is rapid application development. In fact, that's one of the techniques. It's called rapid application development, or RAD. And there's lots of different variations of that, which it's all about speed. And I think with all that speed, sometimes it's easier to get flaws that attackers can take advantage of. So it's very difficult to minimize these vulnerabilities for the reasons I just stated. And according to your textbook, the size and complexity of these projects is fairly large. There's a lack of formal specifications, which I talked about, right? That's rapid application development. There's not as much design going into programs now as there used to be. And again, one of the other trends is the ease of development. It used to be that you had to develop systems from the ground up, but today we import all these third-party tools and toolkits and libraries and so forth into programs that we no longer are writing everything from scratch. And we can just kind of we can sort of stitch together a working system from all these different components that are available to us, either licensed or open source and so forth. So attackers know all this stuff, and they know that there's a lot of common components. For example, almost everyone that uses encryption uses one of very few standard libraries for encryption. So if you find a flaw in that library, then you found a flaw in just about every program that uses that library. Or if you know there was a flaw in an old version, then you know that that's permeated into lots of people who are no longer or who have not upgraded to the latest version of that particular library. So again, software development, there used to be a very regimented life cycle, which it looks something like this. You started with requirements where you list the features that you need. Then you did some design where you tried to design a system that was going to meet those needs. And then you implement by coding the new system. And then you verify by doing some testing, and then you do a release. So you ship the software after the testing, and then you do ongoing support. In a perfect world, this would be a very thorough process to make sure that there are no flaws in the software. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to happen in the real world as often as it should. Obviously, many companies do this, but for every company that has a very regimented process that's thorough, there's probably 10 other ones that do not. So it's important to be aware of that. And here's a graphical representation of that software development process. And why we're showing you this in a course like this is it's important to know what thorough and correct software development process looks like. So you have some idea of what to expect in an organization that's doing this in a way that would minimize these different vulnerabilities that we've talked about. So in application security, which we talked about earlier in this course, we talk about a lot of these flaws in software. So again, this is a good model to look to if you want to minimize those flaws in your own applications, in your own processes, to make sure that make sure that you have the minimum number of flaws, because you're doing some very good design, to make sure you're thinking about all these different things. Maybe you even have some input from IT security experts for that software domain, and that you're also testing for all this stuff. So a lot of testing is focused primarily on functional testing, and even non-functional as far as performance and things like that. But it's also important to do some security vulnerability testing as well early on in the process.